Record the clock. Nah, maybe we can just start like with a little bit introduction, I guess, so it feels more friendly and approachable for everyone. Maybe we can start from Tono. I'm gonna be the last one.
Hey everyone, I'm Dono. I'm from Indonesia. I'm studying public policy. This is my first semester at ANUSA.
Hello, I'm Angga, studying public policy as well. This is my second year from Indonesia.
Hello, I'm Alexia. I'm studying arts and sciences, and I'm also from activism.
Hello, Mike. I'm studying environment. This is my second semester. I'm from China.
Hi everyone, I'm Trisha from Vanuatu. I study anthropology.
Hey, I'm Ren, from Uni Students for Climate Justice. I'm studying ecology and evolution in Bachelor of Science, and it's like my second year.
I'm Brett, studying PPIA International Security, and I'm the elected ANUSA environment officer.
Okay, so yeah, so my name's Aska. I'm doing my master degree in Master of International Development Economics. This is my second year, and yeah, I'm gonna like help like in facilitating discussion today. But because we only have like few numbers, so I guess like everyone become a lecturer or like we can share as well. So it's not like only one side. And I just want to ask whether you guys, right? Do you have any presentation you want to show?
Yeah.
Okay, but maybe we can take turns. Who want to?
Yeah.
You want to go first? Okay. Yeah, maybe you can share your presentation.
What
Yeah.
Indonesian student architecture is?
So yeah, so just a little brief in Harry. I mean, so just a little bit like introduction. So we have this Indonesian Association. It's actually like global association, not only in Canberra or Australia, but it's the whole world. But then it has branches, and the branch is like one in like countries. So it's Australia, and then it goes down until university. So there's Indonesian Association in Canberra level, and then this Indonesian Association in ANU level. The one that organized the event today, discussion today, is from the Indonesia Association in Canberra. So that's when probably Mike or Teresa like sometimes ask me like, do you guys have a lot of activities? Yep, because we just have a lot of branches like in Indonesia Association, and we kind of connected one and another. So for example, like this kind of like discussion is just one of that kind of activity that we do. Like just yesterday, we did the welcoming students to ANU in ANU, and then like last week we have this welcoming students in whole Canberra. So it's always like something happening, and we really wish like we kind of reflect like we don't really have a discussion or talk with other students, I guess, like from other association. So if probably like there's a Chinese association, is there a Chinese association? Like
I think so. I never joined this.
But it's gonna be interesting, you know, because we do like a lot of things together, like between countries. So if we also have discussion like across students from different countries and people, it will be great. And Rui, you haven't introduced yourself.
Oh,
We already did. Yep.
Because I'm majoring in math of economics, so the CB1, which is really close to our residential hall. I live in Hall. I moved here last July, so right now with regard here.
Yeah, thank you, Rui. So yeah, there's a little bit background as well to Rex and Ren. Like in total, we have around like 200 students, 220 students, and mostly are postgraduate. Same like graduate house. And Rex like asked earlier why we call TOAD. Maybe someone want to explain a little bit. Teresa, you remember the story yesterday?
The students who decided here really felt that it was of after name of a lecturer or vice chancellor. So it was associated with a book. I forgot which one, but it was nice.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that one.
Yeah, that one. So it's a pretty a movement itself from total. They call it insurgent communities residents. Like they are the one who like push the name so they don't have these white people names again, I guess. and then they just like start drawing or paint toad in the sign in front of this building when it's first established. And then like after that, like I think within 1 year, and you recognize that as this whole name. Right, Zubair?
Hi, I was wondering what is happening.
Now we just kind of have this like talk discussion related to climate change and student activism. And oh my God, we've have you guys mentioned your country? Oh yeah, you did. You can introduce your name, Zubair.
Okay, so as you can hear, I'm Zubair. I'm from Bangladesh and I study public policy at Property. He's my classmate. So
Oh,
that's all from me.
thank you, Zubair. So maybe Angga, you want to start? And then we can go around and hear from everyone.
Everything from your statement. I mean, it's good that Prof has, very radical history. Because they named it before it's officially named by the university, and I hope that we will, just
Yeah.
get the history back again, try to radicalize this whole again.
Mhm. Okay. That's the presentation. If you want to talk here, I can just click. Yep.
Go ahead. This is good. What is this? Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such an honor to be speaking in front of you all. So I'm going to talk about climate change and student activism in Indonesia. This is quite interesting because I enjoyed this topic a lot because I did some experience as well in terms of like environmental issues in Indonesia. I hope that I can share it here. But first of all, some people maybe don't know yet where Indonesia is. Geographically speaking, as you can see on the picture, Indonesia is very close to Australia. We're like neighbors. So it's interesting to see how Indonesia and Australia relations in terms of climate issue as well. Yeah, considering we are very close. So yeah, that's Indonesia, pretty large as well, like Australia. And yeah, Indonesia at a glance. So I'm gonna introduce you to my country, Indonesia. So Indonesia is famous for its diverse and dramatic landscape. Best known for its beautiful beaches, astonishing ideas, and dense forests. But I'm here not to talk about. No, I'm not tourism minister here. I'm not going to be promoting tourism activities in Indonesia. Rather, I am very apposite today, different from common international students who usually promote their countries, encourage everyone to come to their countries because we have like a beautiful places to visit, like this one. But I'm not talking about this pictures, the beauty of Indonesia. So I am going to talk about this one. Okay, the destruction in Indonesia. Well, because I think it's important, to be honest and open towards what's happening in our country. Because when we know the problems, when we know the root of the problems, we can, create the solutions. Let's say when you're a doctor, when you mistakenly diagnose your patients, they will not be healed by the doctor. Yeah, it's similar when we are talking about climate issues, environmental problems. It's important for me personally to understand the problems as well. All right. So as those slides show, deforestation is a major environmental issue in Indonesia. According to the Global Forest Watch, between 2001 and 2020, Indonesia destroyed million hectares of forest. losing 17% of its forest cover and creating 19 billion tons of CO2 emissions. In recent decades, my direct causes of forest loss have been expansions of oil palm. So this is an area used for oil palm industries. Agricultural crops and mining. Yeah, this is an area, ex-mining place in Indonesia. When you're standing here, it feels like you're standing in another planet because it's really dry, but no one is there. So yeah, this is in my province. Because there's so many things to cover, I want to focus on one of the main causes of this destruction, mainly from mining issues in East Kalimantan, and how local people resist, fight against these movements, including from student movements, which is our topic today. Yeah, which is a place where I come from as well. I'm from Borneo Island. I grew up there. That's why I think it's relevant to me personally as well for my explanation. I'm going to explain this from the perspective of political economy, which, in my opinion, can give comprehensive explanation from what has been going on there. So these are my outlines. I'm going to present these 4 points. First of all, what is extractivism? Extractivism broadly refers to those activities which remove large quantities of natural resources. They are not processed or only to a limited degree, especially for export. Well, brief history in Kalimantan. So this is my island, Kalimantan. I live there in East Borneo. It used to be well known as lung of the world due to its dense forests and biodiversity. Many say that it is comparable to Amazon in Brazil. Even there's some Hollywood movies as well, as I remember, were produced there, showing the forests and their biodiversity in Kalimantan. But unfortunately, massive deforestation has decreased forest areas in Kalimantan. As you can see, from 1950s to now. But the picture is actually contested, but I think it's still relevant. Deforestation is still happening there. One of the biggest issues of deforestation is from coal mining industries. East Kalimantan is one of the biggest coal mining producers in Indonesia. Last year, post-pandemic, it contributed to 53.24% of or 490.5 trillion of the province's total gross regional domestic product. The root of extractivism can be traced back since the colonial era. However, the peak of natural resource exploitation started from Suharto's authoritarian regime, because we've lived under a dictatorship regime from 1965. Suharto first issued foreign investment laws in 1967 to create a business-friendly environment. These laws accommodated foreign enterprises to effectively exploit natural resources, primarily in other islands, including in East Kalimantan. East Kalimantan's timber and oil were, in the past, 2 major sectors of Indonesia's microeconomy, especially during the timber and oil boom in the 1970s. However, as the exploitation of timber and oil intensified, conflicts often broke between the state, private sector, and local communities whose livelihoods have been displaced by extractive projects. Suharto effectively repressed the resistance and accused those who opposed the exploitation of resisting national development. Sounds familiar, right? Even now, the government also, accused people of, protesting as against national development. Under Suharto, political decisions were fully centralized along with patronage. This led to rampant corruption that undermined the government, creating what Paulo Krugman called crony capitalism. The financial crisis, exacerbated by massive corruption, triggered the fall of the Suharto regime in 1998. Since then, Indonesia's politics shifted to decentralization. Okay, decentralization era and transnational politics in mining sectors. Due to decentralization, many actors shifted from national to local. Okay, in Jakarta to local levels in Kalimantan. However, the decentralization raises new problems. The coalition of Bersihkan Indonesia, which means Bersihkan Indonesia, sorry. I'm very excited to speak. In the report, found a correlation between political corruption and mining licenses. At election times, local elections at the professional level and district levels require significant political funding. Political funding is expensive in Indonesian politics. Let's say you want to be a governor in Indonesia. Anti-corruption agency said that you need to at least like 50 billion rupiah to be a governor, at least. And once, it doesn't guarantee that you'll be elected, even though you like that much money. That's why only the rich can afford it. Yeah, so it makes sense for us if the rich really dominates our politics, especially in Indonesia. Therefore, money from the coal mining business then fuels the funding needs for potential candidates in the election. As a reward, elected politicians would ease and legalize some mining concessions once they've been elected. Mining Advocacy Network, or JATAM, dubbed this phenomenon Ijon politik, derived from transactional politics, or for Prof. Aspinall here at ANU, called clientelism. Anti-corruption agency and non-government organizations noted a sharp increase in mining permits at election times. In 2013, for example, general elections, mining permits increased from 1,271 to 1,433 permits after the elections. In Kutai Kartanegara, this is one of the regions in Indonesia, one of the districts of East Kalimantan. Its former regent was even arrested by anti-corruption agency for her involvement in a bribery case related to a plantation permit. So people nicknamed it the Queen of Coal because there's like a big coal industry in her area. She successfully established a lot of sectors in her area, including educations, infrastructures, and so on. But it didn't stop her from committing corruption. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison for being proven to have received 10 billion gratification. As you can see on the picture, corruptor in Indonesia is smiling when they are catched by anti-corruption agency. She doesn't look like guilty. Yeah, it's normal. Indonesian people even like, why are you smiling? You have done bad mistakes for people, but she still happy. Okay, I believe my Indonesian friends are familiar with this guy, with this person. Okay, and mining extractivism has been a beneficial source for businessmen and political elites taking advantage of their position. In fact, some mining owners are owned by political elites and have close relationship with them, such as their family members and relatives, including this person, Luhut bin Sarpanjaitan. Many people call him Opo, that is grandpa, in Bahasa Indonesia. And many people call him Minister of All Affairs, because, or again, the real Indonesian president, or even Prime Minister of Indonesia. It's because he has led many institutions under Jokowi's government, such as Prime Minister for Industry and Trade, Leadership of Corp Staff, Coordinating Minister for Political, Legal, and Security Affairs, and so on. Yeah, basically he has led so many institutions. He's like really a person that Jokowi is our president. And Luhut founded a mining industry or Toba Group in 2004. He was the largest shareholder at the time in the business. And Stobo's net profit continued to rise until 2014 because there's a boom of coal industries in the world. Luhut's wealth rose from 7.1 billion in 2001 to 660 billion in 2015 rupiah. This fact shows how beneficial the mining business is for a political elite who dubs as a businessman. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the impacts on the environment and society. The economic argument often claims that industries based on exploitation of natural resources have successfully contributed to economic growth, which led to local development, especially to employment and human development index. However, this claim doesn't indicate a lot of things. We need to, recognize it. Satria, through his study on distributional aspects of growth in East Kalimantan, showed that the primary beneficiary of the current development is the rich. Villagers surrounding coal mines, on the other hand, bear great losses. Ecological losses from resource exploitations are massive. Many rivers and water sources become polluted due to coal company waste. Lands contaminated by the company waste also become less fertile, as you can see here, paddy fields near concession area. Consequently, people find it harder to access clean water for daily use, which is mainly borne by the poor. Farmers who depend on clean water quality to grow rice, vegetable products, and fish production experience crop failures as well. In 2017, more than 1,024 hectares of lowland rice in a region couldn't be harvested due to flooding from the mining waste of PT Kidari. You can see it's flooding to the paddy fields. Waterkeeper Alliance and Jatam argue that mining extractivism contributes to the food crisis as well. Farmers around mining pits report rice yields down 50% and fish production down 80% because of mining industry. In addition, citizens become increasingly vulnerable to the disasters. In the provincial capital, Samarinda, whose 70% of the land covers mining concessions, flooding events are reported as being more frequent and widespread since coal mining arrivals, from 25 points in 2011 to 48 points in 2019. So I did my undergrad there, as you can see, mining ships like parking around the city. That's why flooding events are more frequent. Moreover, resource exploitation has caused a human tragedy, with 41 teenagers and children drowning in abandoned ex-mining pits since 2011. According to Indonesian law, mining companies are required to restore the mining environmental after use. However, many companies violate this regulation, which makes the catastrophe continue in East Kalimantan. National Commission on Human Rights declared this case as a violation of human rights, particularly against the right to life, rights to have a good and healthy living environment, right to justice, and child's life. Okay, let's move on to this another issue. As I said earlier, mining sector contributes to the increasing cases of agrarian conflicts in Indonesia, as local communities refuse to be excluded from their lands. Consortium for Agrarian Reform reported that agrarian conflicts during the 5 years of Jokowi's administration exceeded the 2 previous periods of President Yudhoyono's administration. During 2015 to 2020 period, agrarian conflicts reached 2,191 cases, compared to 1,170 cases in the 10 years of SB's administration. The mining sector accounted for 141 conflicts during the 5 years. Jatam noted the most mining conflicts occurred in East Kalimantan. These conflicts show the existing resistance of the locals in facing the mining expansion. In East Kalimantan, resistance movements are led by various groups in some parts of the province. Farmers-led movements in Kukar and Samarinda were reported against coal and oil palm plantations. Some movements went against Luhut Binsar's company for affecting the lands of 6 farmer groups in the 3 sub-districts. I think it was like a national issue in 2016. In Pasir, which is my region, indigenous people perform a traditional ritual in struggles against a giant mining company, which has displaced their customary forests for decades, I think since 1980s. Students also organized to fight against the industry. In 2014, under the umbrella of Samarinda lawsuit movements, oh, it's not there. An alliance consisting of student organizations, NGOs, scholars, farmers, and indigenous groups demanded the responsible parties to restore the environment and evaluate all mining projects in the city. It's interesting because there's like a strong alliance as well between students and other various groups in Indonesia. Yeah, I'm keen to hear how does the alliance for climate justice look like here in Australia. After 2 years battles in the higher court, the GSM movement won the verdict, and the judges obliged the Samarinda city government to regulate better policies on mining sectors. This result shows that pressures from below can also make changes. I was a new student at the time. I remember that we went back and forth from campus after class in the city to the court and conflict areas in the villages as well. Nevertheless, government actors and mining companies also took oppressive measures to hinder the movements. Like in Bangun City district, for instance, one person was killed. 20 protesters were imprisoned, and many were beaten in a protest against the issuance of mining permits on their land. One of the indigenous peoples performing a traditional ritual in Paset that I mentioned earlier was criminalized just because they, they are doing a ritual in their area. Despite the threats, struggles from below have been capable of hindering mining operations. In the movements, people could build up confidence, let alone once the movement reached a massive scale. One positive example is from this area. It's in Sanga-Sanga Melawan movement. Sanga-Sanga have consistently opposed mining industry's presence in the area since 2014. This is because they have like a radical history in their village. Their village was a base for Indonesian independent activists in the past against the Dutch in Kalimantan. That's why they have a strong radical history. Once they've seen injustices, they will fight against it. They could build large movements by involving solidarity from students and NGOs in the city. Last time I remember, before I came to Australia, my friends and I were invited to speak at their training on agriculture and sex education for children. So it's very rare, in Indonesia to have like a sex education for children. That's why they invited us to speak at that event. Interestingly, SMM was carried out by preserving an independent economy, such as growing agriculture products and public meetings places near concession areas. And this is a picture where they're celebrating our independence, right in a place where the concession area was. All right, that's my presentation. So these are some environmental issues around mining sectors in Indonesia. Indonesia, different from Australia, I guess, climate change and renewable energy are not popular issues among students as popular as here. However, the struggle to protect the environment from the destructive industries occurs massively in various regions, including in Kalimantan. And students provide strong support for such resistance. Yeah, I'm keen to hear the Australian context as well on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Angga, for giving information related to Indonesian issues in climate change. But just let you know, because we have a map here. So Kalimantan Borneo is in this part in the world. That's yeah. You don't need to map. We have it here. Yeah, this one. So this is Indonesia, and then in the middle we have this called Kalimantan, and it's actually just one of the many islands that we have, and this is they have the biggest vast and dense forest. That's why if you guys heard about the issue of forestry and the indigenous community, usually it's come from Borneo Island. And I mean, before like we are talking, we're hearing from the Australian context. I just want to hear from you guys. What do you think about like what happening in Indonesia? Maybe, Teresa, what do you think? Like, oh, Mike, what do you think?
I mean, it's pretty common, like in every country, they have this protest.
Uh-huh.
After, say you turn from a government, it's kind of like a dictatorship and transforming into a government who has sort of democracy. And during that protest, like, in order to achieve certain kind of economic growth,
Mhm.
the trade-off made is like we sacrifice the environmental conditions to like gain progress. I mean, it's kind of happy to see that there are protesting going on in Indonesia to prevent this process. But, yeah, but also it's kind of like during the whole speech, there are things like about the shitty things that mining companies being carried out. But like, how is that related to climate change, for example, and what has this hard?
Maybe you want to add that, respond to that.
Yeah, I think coal sector contributes to the increase of.
Oh, you mean like releasing the like carbon dioxide?
Also, the removal of the forest heavily impacts like the biodiversity and it's releasing a lot of the carbon storage.
Yeah. So yeah, that's like I mean, when we are talking about coal, it's like from the forest and then it's gone. And then like forest was supposed like absorbing the oxygen, now it's gone. And then like mostly like and then after that they built like coal. I mean, I live in this regency called South Sumatra. Not South Sumatra is the province, but Muara Enim. And that's like the second largest coal plant as well. And to be honest, my husband works in a coal plant. So I know it's hard to, clean the house every day. I have to mop like 3 times. Maybe we girls, we can a little bit relate to that especially. And the pollution, I mean, like the the asthma prevalence, it's higher compared to other region. And if we go like 2 hours just far from that city, it feels much better, the air quality. So when I remember after I went back home during summer to my town in South Sumatra. And then when I get out and be in that town, it's like, oh my God, suffocating, I guess, compared to the Canberra air quality. So that's like one other thing, that's why like usually like the people who live there is going to be the one who protest or like have the stronger voice. Trisha, what do you think?
I was very brave to join the protest. I didn't take it but yeah, I'm not really one of to engage in protests. And I find those who have the who are brave enough to do that. And in terms of the mining and the flooding that occurs in that particular region, I can't remember now how intense it can be, given the change in weather conditions, and everyone says it's changing climate change, but to the heights of how high the floods can go, as I think in 2020 or 22, but I can't remember. The flooding in Brisbane, in Queensland, and how high that was for many, and including in my country too, with some of the weather events. That was not the same, and a lot is to do with changes to the environment caused by bank themselves and companies. And even though our government is saying we need better policies and around this, and also just regulations around this, bribery.
Yeah, it's a lot happened.
Greed is still big, and I wonder how politicians are rich, but of course there's a lot of under the table going around just to get just for the private sector, whether it's to get what they want out of the government or establish themselves in our country.
Yeah. So yeah, basically like especially from those who just came, Angga just like explaining a little bit related to issues in environment and climate change in Indonesia, and he take cases from his town in East Kalimantan. So I think from the one from Indonesia don't miss too much, but after this we're gonna hear more the context in Australia. And I mean this moment I think it's also for reflection. So it's not only like from Indonesia, Australia, but I would like to hear as well like from Bangladesh, Chinese case, and then who else? Vanuatu, and then like other countries. So it's gonna be great just to add in the discussion. So do you want to share a little bit about Australia context?
You know, speak.
You want to speak?
As in, I'm doing a speech.
Okay, yeah. You want to do the speech or?
Do it now.
Yeah, sure. Can you guys move it a little bit here? Just filling the chairs. Come on.
The foot's here.
The food is here though. And just enjoy the food. Oh yeah, but I don't. Can you text Carlos? He's the duty SR. Yeah. The food is here, just enjoy it during the session. And yeah, so everyone,
Ready?
yeah, please.
Yeah, I find that very interesting, that talk. Connection to Indonesia, 'cause my mom spent the first quarter of her life not Indonesian, but full work. Anyway, my name is Rex, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have some lesions. I'm not an expert on this. That's it. Take this. But failure. Very hot, like Central and Northern Australia. So they have very fragile ecosystems. A lot of them are held alive by like sort of mangroves, which support plant life, bird life, etc. Another feature of this is the reefs and the Great Barrier Reef, with heat causing warm waters and coral bleaching. When the coral gets sort of stressed, it expels algae and the coral tissue becomes transparent. Another obvious feature is that of bushfires, which aren't necessarily a bad thing in the ecosystem, because many seeds rely on them to germinate. But the ferocity of recent fires is devastating. They burn in larger areas and much hotter than they're supposed to. So in recent years, we've seen devastation, infrastructure, deaths. If we just look back to Canberra in 2019, we had air pollution equivalent to smoking 18 packs of cigarettes a day for 3 entire months. And sort of the international community sort of latched onto this whole koala thing and all that, which is true. Koala's habitat was devastated, but it was a sort of narrow focus to a much broader issue, like permanently wet forests that usually suppress fire were burnt through all that. There's drought, and just sort of an extreme example of that is sort of this thing from SARO and the Bureau of Meteorology, which shows precipitation could reduce by 50% in the large area of Southwest Australia by 2090 if greenhouse gas emissions aren't reduced. I think I wanted to say in talking about the issues we face in Australia, I don't mean to say we are disproportionately affected or uniquely challenged, and I think that that's kind of what this is about. But Australia is
sort of wealthy country with strong connections to the international community and internal stability, and we're geographically gifted in many ways. So I think it's important to acknowledge that like other states, like Pacific Island states with rising sea levels, will mean many people displaced. Many will turn to Australia as climate refugees, which I think will be an emerging issue. And with Australia's historic inhumane treatment of refugees, I think there's something we really got to start thinking about in the next couple years. So next wanted to talk about what in my view is sort of the causes of the climate crisis. And I'd firstly like to establish that I'm a proponent of big systematic change. I think the current model of unlimited growth with finite resources is unsustainable. I myself am a socialist, and I think environmental degradation is natural and inevitable byproduct of a sort of capitalist system we have. But I don't think you have to be a socialist to recognize that Australia is greatly contributing to the climate crisis. I'll firstly touch on sort of coal and gas mining, which is an important part of the Australian economy, as Australia is the second largest exporter of coal in the world. Coal and gas seam drilling disrupts aquifers, as was mentioned, that are essential to agriculture and the natural environment. Coal mines are known to discharge large amounts of contaminated water into our river system. And no one knows what to do with the huge amounts of this contaminated water that result from these coal seams or gas drilling. And with a series of mega mines, there are plans to significantly increase the amount of coal we mine and export within a decade. So Tanya Plibersek only just last week approved the opening of another gas project in Tauri, Queensland. 114 gas wells, and that isn't an isolated incident. This government is continuing the process of approving coal and gas projects started by the Liberals, continuing Adani, starting up Scarborough's huge gas mining project in Western Australia, and has allowed the gas company Santos to overturn native title on Gomeroi country in northern New South Wales for the gas wells. Likewise, we use fossil fuel sources for energy, which is both inefficient and destructive. Australia, through its geography and just generally, has a unique opportunity to develop renewable energy sources. A lot of our energy grid is underdeveloped. It would require a lot of investment, but our energy consumption of energy generally is inefficient right now, and infrastructure would sort of pay dividends in the long run. We sort of might run into this argument with Australia and the climate that we can contribute 1.3% of global emissions. So you have some people say it's a sort of drop in the bucket, and that countries like China are the ones that need to change. But it's important to bear in mind that our population is 0.3% of the world, so disproportionate, and even more so when you account for exports. So when like coal exports, for example, Australia contributes massive 4% of global emissions if you count exports. And we definitely have the capacity to change. So I don't think that is any excuse. I think I'll talk about environmental activism within Australia. It's kind of what I do. But I'll first touch on that. I think when we're talking about climate activism and student activism, it is important to discuss the role and the continuing role of Indigenous justice in this. I think colonialism was the original catalyst for destruction of Australia's environment, and the issues discussed all stem from this kind of point. Australia is sort of, in all these issues, spat on the concept of care for country. And I think as a student activist, as part of this conversation with the environment, we should call for resourcing First Nations-led solutions and guaranteed land rights and care. So I wanted to talk about climate activism specifically, and what students can do. There is this notion forwarded by governments and companies that we must come together and sort of take individual responsibility. This notion that we must be sustainable in our everyday lives, must recycle, sort of ride your bike or use a keep cup for your coffee. And these things are good objectively, but in discussion of what to do about the changing climate, as students, the reality is that 90 companies, mainly fossil fuel companies, are responsible for 2/3 of carbon emissions. The causes I've outlined it's an institutional problem, and that is why I believe sort of participation in activism and protest in whatever capacity a student can is how we can make real substantial change. The university, the government have a storied history with sort of complicity in the climate crisis. So I'm part of ANUSA, the ANU Student Association. There is PASA, I think most of you are postgraduates, and I imagine you mostly know what that is. But I'll explain specifically what I do in the context of ANUSA. By the way, PASA is done after this semester, so I will be your student representative. Yeah, so within ANUSA, we have the departments. We have queer, Indigenous, women's, disability, international students, which are all sort of autonomous departments for student advocacy. And then there's me, the environment department. I'm the officer elected, so I headed up this year. And sort of the function of a union is to advocate for the interest of, in this case, students, and the EC, the Environment Collective, advocate for students' bodies' interest in sort of the future we want to live in. And is why to many within ANUSA, we believe it should be an activist body to sort of stand up to the university, which the university itself has a bad history with the environment. So to engage in student activism in opposition to the university is sort of what we do. But we also engage in activism more broadly, advocating for the government to do better. I've worked in the collective as general secretary last year and officer this year, and in my participatory capacity in activism, I've learned a few observations and insights that I might hope to impart. The first observation is that climate activists are a broad church, especially sort of in Canberra. It has many different organizations working within it. They differ much in approach. Some target sort of deforestation, Indigenous land rights, or the climate crisis more broadly. And some utilize sort of community-based solutions in advocating for local events and green initiatives, other opt for protests on the streets. Some, like Extinction Rebellion, engage in disruptive protests, so blockades and other forms of disruption. I think I'd like to stress the importance of sort of national movements. The change needed in Australia is substantial and consequently requires a sort of great deal of mobilization. Just last Friday, the EC, in conjunction with high school students, organized the school strike for climate protest here in Canberra. Sort of like just Greta Thunberg, high school students and secondary school students, well, they are secondary school, primary school students, skip class and protest climate action. And these are perhaps sort of the biggest climate protests that happen in Australia. And I think it signals we need more national movements, building coalitions between groups and not exclusively relying on sort of isolated action. I'd say my main criticism in working with school strike before this, and it lends itself to my sort of second observation about what works in activism, is that the demands were sort of general and not necessarily clear. So sort of calling for climate action as sort of a vague concept. I think when protesting for climate action, it is important for students to articulate real demands in policy and messaging. Some of the past school strikes have largely consisted of general cause climate action. But in our collaboration with them last Friday and organizing the protest, we made sure in our speeches, media release, and much of the messaging, we articulated specific strong demands. For example, there were no new coal, oil, and gas, including the Narrabri coal stream gas project and the Kuri Kuri gas plant, 100% public renewable energy and exports by 2030, funding a just transition for fossil fuel workers and their communities, and real carbon cuts, not offsets, and resource First Nations-led solutions that guarantee land rights and care for country. One of the things I believe it is important for us students to be wary of when engaging in climate activism is this concept of a just transition. Was one of the demands. And in advocating for this sort of radical change, I think the workers involved in the mining and energy industry are vitally important. And you spoke to sort of the local community. I think that lends itself to this, which is, yeah. And one of the most effective actions in recent history was public protest and rallies against Santos gas, and the environment officer of UNSW, I believe, led a large sort of movement to this effect. So student advocacy, and built this sort of protest against Santos gas, built to raising electrical workers' confidence. The electrical trade union voted that they will not work on the Santos Narrabri gas project. Because workers have sort of just as much interest in saving the environment as student activists. So I don't think we should leave them behind in this process. Part of this is having sort of publicly owned energy and mining, so that firms don't seek profit over the interest of said workers. But we need projects like renewable energy to supplement what is lost in the communities when asking for this big transition. I think it's an important sort of tenet of climate advocacy. I will say sort of the future of activism in many ways is sort of discouraged recently with the major left-wing government in power now. And the improvements aren't there that activists have been asking for across the board. And there are also new protest laws which are authoritarian and have seen many climate activists, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria, sort of be arrested. But I don't think this should be disheartening, but rather a call to arms. And a lot of this activism process is sort of demonstrating the reality that these institutional powers are not on your side. So I hope this can have some light at the end of the tunnel. So it's all well and good, but where should students start if you want to? I can't really understate the importance of just attending a protest. It is a couple hours, but it makes a big difference to the groups organizing these protests and supports the action in question. If you want to or have the capacity to get involved in organizing, in my experience, it is very difficult to go it alone. Not just because organizing requires a lot of effort, but it is sort of this kind of emotional labor. And there are many groups organizing in different capacities on campus and Canberra, but I will shamelessly plug the Environment Collective as part of your student union. We passed an amendment so postgraduates can join part of it. And we sort of, yeah, our goal is we did the school strike protest, more protests to come, and just general events around political education, but also just speaking to students directly. Even just within the ANU still insists on retaining its investments with fossil fuels. On the board, sort of ruling council of ANU, you have Westfarmers, Suncorp, KPMG executives, because they're appointed by ministers and Liberal ministers. And even historically, you see sort of them waiting for the environmental sustainability plan to expire to build Canberra over a natural waterway. So all that like concrete ugly buildings just sort of, you see last year we saw like Chifley bottom floor flood, sort of because the water remembers where it's supposed to go. Yeah, so ultimately I just think activism and student activism is important, and I implore anyone interested to get involved. It's an insurmountable challenge. Sorry, it's not an insurmountable challenge. I think if we organize and rally together, effectively.
This is actually very interesting. I have like many questions in my head, not asking like to you, but all the audience here as well. But would you guys mind to get into the sofa? So I mean, we can hear like clear. Chris, you can go here as well. Lisa, there. So like and Ren, so that we, as I told you earlier, so we also have this Indonesian association, but in ANU, that's what we call it. It's similar to ANUSA, but it's ANUSA because it has I. So sometimes when I say it like ANUSA, are you going? Oh, you joined the ANUSA, like the undergrad? No, ANUSA. It's like Indonesian Association for ANU. So like when you're talking about student activism, I also want to hear from ANUSA. What is your perspective after hearing what Rex said before?
Or here in AU,
Yeah.
Indonesian student.
Yeah, I'm a student. Because like earlier also like Angga already like give a little bit spoiler, like Indonesia is not really common actually for students, especially talking about issue in climate change. When we already graduate and we start working on this topic, then we probably start caring about it. But now we are in Australia, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think, Luke?
Maybe like this is my personal opinion.
Yes, that's right.
Not as become like a community of ANUSA, but yeah, I think like this kind of session and this like this is also like very common to not only about the even like political things. It's also not very common in Indonesia too. So this is like give me an insight. I think like maybe we can doing this kind of activity in the future. And I think we in ANUSA we also have like a research campaign, and we are maybe like in the future we can come, you know, like adapting this kind of session or like having a joint session with other organizations too about the issue in climate change and
So
yeah, that's
yeah, that's great. I mean, like this kind of session is actually just like we wish to spark the ideas because it's not really common, especially for Indonesian students. And now we also hear it from the Australian perspective. So that's good. We also hear a little bit from China and Vanuatu. And another thing that I want to ask to the audience is related to your statement earlier related on systemic change. And some of audience here, the students here work in the government before actually. And they are No, it's all right. I mean, the government is
That's fine.
so maybe. And yeah, what do you think? Is it possible to have a systemic change? Do you think? Can you? What do you think? Yeah. Some of them also working in a public. I mean, studying public policy.
Yeah. Yes, of course. I think this kind of forum is good as starting point. I mean, we are in the future. Who knows? Maybe you are the Ministry of the Area Resource, maybe, right? This is a good thing. And actually, in Indonesia currently, we already joined the Paris Agreement, and we already commit to reduce our carbon, and we already have planned until 2050, if I'm not mistaken. And but to be honest, it's not so good in my opinion, because still 53%, if I'm not mistaken, still from the coals. Yeah. But we using in our opinion, it's just gimmick that we use green technology in using the coal. But still, I think the focus of the government now is to shift the energy, our energy market to electricity, and we can use, because since currently we are the import so many oil, but we want to change to coals and change the market's energy to electricity. I think.
Yeah.
So the focus is not
Yeah.
not like here. I heard that in Canberra, like almost all the electricity is from the
Renewable
energy. Am I right? Yes, but
Over
just
here.
in Canberra. In other states still not so.
Yeah.
Canberra also uses a lot of offsets, which is a whole nother importance.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things like happening in Indonesia, and we also have this massive and priority program called Biofuel. It's basically transitioning from coal to coal electricity generation plant to wood packers. It's called biofuel, and it's still like contested as well, because like many people say that it's going to increase the deforestation and everything. But again, it's very interesting. I want to hear from Loma. I know you're working with the government as well.
Okay, my name is Loma. I'm from Tuvalu. Front line of the I work for the government, yes, for the China Department of Information.
Very real.
I've been to a couple of talks, climate change conferences. So I think I want to ask him a question. It's like something personal to me. So what's, just out of curiosity, what's the motivation to climate change?
That's a good question.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
it's not my parents asked me to, right?
I guess it all sounds I've always sort of had an interest in politics generally and history and politics, and I sort of have beliefs that I think are really, some would say right. So, I think I'm reasonable person, but you know, and I think the natural evaluation of having those beliefs and seeing the world and a government that sort of conflicts with what you believe is doing, I think it is a motivating factor in a sense, because I get fulfillment out of sort of doing that. And I also think when I graduate university and when I'm like calling for systematic change or even working with government, I think that likely will be me. So I think in working in the student union and organizing outside of that, while I'm at this sort of unique point in my life, I have the opportunity now to sort of do something while I might not necessarily later, which lends itself to this whole discussion of student activism and politics.
Thank you. Did it answer your question?
Yeah, and you know why I asked, because coming here to Australia, I have that perspective,
Mhm.
Australia cost climate change, so like, right now, like, listening to, like, especially students and younger generation to have that kind of motivations, like, sort of giving me the sort of hope. Yeah. For my country, but it's 16 next 15 years or something.
That's so cool. That's a very great question. But we still have one more setting, and we're gonna explore more about your thoughts. I know I haven't like asked some of the questions. I actually have questions as well. This why I'm gonna throw it to the audience after this. But Ren, you wanna share your presentation? You use this presentation, right?
Yes, it's on a Google slide, so I can send a link.
I already opened it. This.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yeah, it's-
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Alright.
Oh, it's off. Where is that? Oh, here.
That's okay.
The forward. This is Indonesia or something. There you go. Ta-da. Nope. Magic, please work. Still processing. Yeah. Wait. What's it, right?
Yeah.
Oh, this is the loading. Nah. Nah, there you go. Okay.
Okay, well, we can just look like this.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, my name's Ren. I'm from Canberra Students for Climate Justice, or Uni Students for Climate Justice. We're like an explicitly anti-capitalist climate activist organization. We kind of established back in like 2019, which was like one of the kind of former heights of the climate movement, which I'll talk about in a little bit of depth later. But I kind of wanted to start off with a bit of some of the similar ground that Rex covered, but kind of talk about some of the recent things that we have seen with the climate crisis in Australia. Globally in 2019, we reached 1.1 degrees of warming, which was predicted to lead to a much greater precedence of severe natural disasters, which we have seen across the world. That's, been like the kind of 2 million people who've been affected by floods in Pakistan last year, the 40-degree heat waves that we saw across Europe, the kind of massive flooding events that we've seen in places like Brazil recently, in China last year, that it's just, there's too many examples to list everything really of kind of all of the devastation that has been seen with the climate crisis in the last few years. And yeah, I kind of do want to focus on the more broader impacts and some of the particular impacts on people and yeah, like not just the kind of biodiversity impacts as well, but it is worth saying that last year there was a new report published that found that basically the majority of the major ecosystems in Australia are predicted to be collapsing in the next 30 years. Which what that means is basically there's going to be a crashing of the kind of ecological systems that exist across Australia. That will not just affect the animals that live in those ecosystems, but us, the animals who also kind of live in those ecosystems in a separate way. It's going to lead to a much worse impact on our quality of life and a worsening effect as well on the climate crisis and CO2 emissions more generally. So this is a picture of Canberra Parliament House from the 2020 bushfires. As Rex mentioned earlier, it was a time where the kind of air quality in Canberra was severe. It wasn't just like this in Canberra, but across Sydney and Melbourne as the fires kind of raged across the south coast of Australia, destroying 3,000 homes across the country. There's still people today who are homeless on the south coast and don't have proper access to support from the government. And yeah, I think across Australia and in Canberra specifically, 6 people passed away, unfortunately, as a result of the kind of smoke inhalation issues from the climate crisis, from this episode of the climate crisis. Also, we've seen a really large increase in mass flooding events in the past couple of years, as we've seen the unusual pattern of La Nina kind of plague the kind of South Pacific region for the past few years. This is a picture of Queensland last year. I think over 300,000 people were affected by the floods in Queensland alone over the past 2 years. And last year in Victoria, there was over 7,300 houses that were destroyed in the flooding. So it's the kind of impacts of the climate crisis are becoming a lot more felt in places like Australia than they have been in the kind of previous years. It's, I think, been an ongoing part of all of our lives, and just something running along in the background, whether it be talking about droughts or taking shorter showers. I think that's something that I and many other people in Australia really grew up being ingrained into us, but it's become just a far more real and pressing issue in the past couple of years than it has been, in the past. I also wanted to highlight there's flooding in Western Australia in the Kimberley region earlier in January this year, and that left towns totally stranded without access to food transport for a couple of weeks, and it was up to the town's residents alone to kind of carry out rescue missions using their kind of personal boats rather than the Australian government, which I think there's been a broader problem of it being left up to ordinary people to kind of bear the brunt of the climate crisis in Australia and the world over, rather than governments having a serious response that looks after us, as well as trying to mitigate some of the worst effects. So I kind of wanted to talk about, who is responsible for the climate crisis. I think, Rex mentioned earlier as well, there's this idea that it's just individual consumption, things like our personal carbon footprints, that we kind of really need to work on reducing. But I think that is very much not the case, and that's a big part of why I think anti-capitalism is an important aspect of climate activism for me. Like Australia, this is a graph of Australia's proportion in export emissions. So our personal carbon footprint is quite great, even though we're at 0.3% of the population. But then Australia's export emissions are make up a far greater percentage of global emissions than is proportional to the 0.3% of the population that we make up. Main things that have been increasing are exports of gas, but we also see increases of metallurgical and thermal coal, as well as oil. Basically the kind of trend is not that any of this is going down, even though there is more of a kind of increase of renewable energy. The trend is just growth, wholesale, which I think is a lot to do with the fact that we live under a capitalist system where a profit motive encourages companies to continue to exploit the earth, to exploit the natural resources that we have, and at no avail or no thought for ordinary people, for the environment. The kind of main concern that every company has to have is, how can I increase my profit margins? And by extension, the Australian state, the Australian government over the past, forever years of its existence has played a very important role in ensuring that Australia can be somewhere that's very profitable, that can be attractive to new investment and business opportunities for companies like Santos, like Adani, for, BHP, Shell, all of these major fossil fuel corporations that have been doubling their profits in the last few years. The priority of the Australian government has continually been ensuring that Australia can be seen as a valuable business area. And I think that is really largely to do with what the role of the Australian government is today. It's not looking after ordinary people. It's not trying to care for communities. It's mainly about preserving the interests of the business class in Australia. And I think that's a really large part of why we see, despite the fact that a vast majority of people in Australia are for a serious transition away from fossil fuels, we see that not only is there not a real transition away, but there's actually been a stark increase in and expansion of the fossil fuel industry. I think as Rex went over a little bit, even under the kind of Labor government, which was posed to be the government that would end the climate wars, that was their kind of slogan that they said about themselves during the federal election last year. A government that poses itself as being more progressive, all of this, they're opening there's 118 new coal and gas projects that have been in the works, which will see Australia's emissions in a kind of export sense double. Any of the safeguard mechanisms or climate targets, none of that actually includes export emissions. It's all about the kind of internal emissions, and all of those about internal emissions, I think, are totally inadequate as well. And none of it really seriously addresses the climate crisis, especially not in the time frame that is necessary and that has been demonstrated to be necessary time and time again. So moving on a bit, like what can we do about this? I think that climate activism is a very important area for trying to affect change. I think the fact that we've seen a total reticence from the government, not just in Australia, but many governments around the world in taking serious action about climate change, despite committing to things like Paris climate agreements or, signing on to deals about supposedly wanting to really target our emissions and that kind of thing. Everywhere we've seen not a serious targeting of emissions, but an increase in the kind of use of fossil fuels alongside an increase in use of renewable energy. For a smaller example, a country like New Zealand, even though they have the kind of goal of 100% renewable energy and they've achieved that, that does not include their main kind of export, and their main emission source, which is methane from agriculture. And I think that kind of, making funky moves with the climate data and with your emissions data is the kind of trend that we've seen from countries around the world. So as a result of that, people like Greta Thunberg have sparked an international movement around the climate strike that started back in 2019. And I've been involved in climate activism since 2018 and the kind of Stop Adani campaign, which was one of the kind of massive new coal mines that was being proposed. And this is from the September 20th global climate strike. And over 6 million people around the world participated in the global climate strike, the September 20th one. And this is Canberra, that's the kind of city walk. And this was like 15,000 strong protests, which is really the biggest protest we've seen in Canberra since like the early 2000s and the protests against the Iraq War. And I think it was a real moment where people felt more confident and felt like they could demand and fight for so much more than what was being put on offer. And I think it tapped into a real frustration and a fear that students, and also, like it's worth saying, it was not just students, it was members of the general public as well, who felt that, climate change is this really pressing issue that is facing us all. And it was a kind of, beautiful, I think, expression of that kind of anger and outrage that nothing is being done, even though more and more it is being admitted from every circle that something needs to be done. And I think that one of the important things that climate activism from students has done is like push the discussion about climate change into a more mainstream area in politics in Australia. It became impossible for figures like Scott Morrison from the Liberal Party to totally deny that climate change exists and to just carry on waving around a lump of coal in Parliament and saying, this isn't going to hurt anyone. It became impossible to have that kind of level of climate denialism, which I think is partly, yeah, that's the kind of genesis of the Labor Party's idea of ending the climate wars, the climate activism that was started with students in 2019. And I think as uni students as well, we can play an important role in trying to mobilize ourselves here. We organized demonstrations and contingents to join all of the climate strikes that happened more kind of broadly with the kind of school strike for climate. At one point, we had a demonstration of 400 people from ANU that like marched to the city to join in the kind of major strikes, and we occupied Northbourne Avenue for a small amount of time to kind of, yeah, draw people's attentions to cause some disruption because, yeah, the kind of issue of climate is so pressing, and you know, we felt that that was kind of what was needed at the time. Yeah, and I think that one of the important things about like, yeah, making climate change a more mainstream issue and making climate activism a more mainstream issue is we need to broaden our movement beyond just students. And I think students can play a role in that, where, you know, can be layers that are more able to participate in activism and more willing to participate in activism that can convince and embolden people and make them feel more confident to join in our kind of movements. Some of the important campaigns in Australia's history around environmental activism and some of the best wins that we've had have been started by student movements. In the 1970s, there was an important campaign against uranium mining, which is very devastating for the environment and causes you know, severe health risks and issues for the workers involved in that industry and anyone living in the surrounding area. And there was student demonstrations in the cities that sparked off a movement that ended up with with yellow cake uranium miners joining in and striking and refusing to participate in the industry anymore. And I think that not just mining workers or workers in these industries, but workers more generally, it's vital that they're involved in our protests. And I think students can play a really important role in drawing more people in and kind of, yeah, popularizing the issue of the climate strikes. Some other kind of bright spots of climate activism in recent history. This is from the same time that that first photo was from, of the bushfires in 2020. Uni Students for Climate Justice called these demonstrations called SAC-ScoMo demonstrations, ScoMo being Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister at the time, because instead of dealing with the climate crisis, he went on a trip to Hawaii, escaping the worst effects of the smoke and the fires, and kind of having a holiday rather than helping out the population of Australia. So there was 100,000 people that participated in these demonstrations across Australia. This is when we were marching on Northbourne Avenue. I think this was like a demonstration of like 3,000 people. So quite a big moment as well. And I think an important part of that is making these natural disasters political, making them not just like a sad, you know, tragic event that is totally beyond any of our control, because it's not. It comes from human activity that has created the climate crisis, and this is not natural. This is, you know, the scale of the bushfires, the scale of the flooding. None of that kind of meets the kind of, yeah, natural scale of natural disasters that we've seen recently. This is a picture of some of the climate refugees from the South Coast who came up to Canberra to join in the demonstrations as well. Yeah, so that's kind of the end of, getting towards the end of my presentation. We have seen a kind of decline in climate activism in the last few years from these heights. I think COVID and that meaning we couldn't demonstrate on the streets really took the wind out of people's sails. I also think that there is something to be said of like, you know, trying to be involved in these kinds of movements when it feels like nobody's listening to you, that can make people feel demoralized. And I think an important thing to push against is the idea that it's an impossible struggle that we're kind of fighting. I think there is a lot that we're up against with the fossil fuel industry in Australia being like one of the most profitable industries, something that the Australian government is very clear that they want to maintain, you know, to the hilt. But I think rebuilding a climate movement that can kind of take on the fossil fuel industry, that can link up with other sections of society, the working class, that can link up with the broadest amounts of people possible is the task that we have to put towards us today. And some of the things that Uni Students for Climate Justice is doing coming up, there's going to be a National Day of Climate Action that's been organised through the National Union of Students on March 17th, and the Canberra demo is, the Canberra version is going to be at 1 p.m. in Canberra, March 17. I really encourage everybody to come along, bring anyone you know who's interested in climate activism. There's, I think, yeah, making a kind of national issue about climate justice, saying that what the Labor Party has done is not good enough for us. We want real action on climate change. We don't want 118 new coal and gas projects. We want something real. We want no new coal and gas. We want a, you know, genuine transition to renewable energies by 2030. Be part of demanding that. Come along to the National Day of Action. And also, if you're interested in getting involved in Uni Students for Climate Justice, we meet every Friday at 3 p.m. on the Canberra lawns. It's kind of very casual and just meet up to discuss like how we can promote upcoming climate activism and yeah, how we can try and get other students involved. So yeah, if you're interested in following what we do, you can also like Canberra Students for Climate Justice on Facebook, and we have all of our events there as well. And I also encourage people to check out the ANUSA Environment Office as well. It's a lot of collaboration we do. But yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ray. So yeah, this is very interesting, like related to protest and demonstration. Uncommon word as well back home. So I want to hear from Tono probably.
Yeah, this interesting question, interesting topic. The first time I heard about activism in climate change, we are in Indonesia. We are not really aware of this. So I think when we have a movement in climate change, the good thing is we have set the awareness for the people. I think that's the important thing. For myself, I'm not really aware about climate change. I just a couple years ago, I just realized it is the impact of the climate change. Like first time, Angga told us there's a lot of deforestation in East Kalimantan. I was there. It is 2013. There's a lot of mining industry. Coal price is crazy high. A lot of people become really rich because of their land have the coal, and I knew it well. And then who is charged, who is responsible? It's human. There's nothing else. Human and the other things have only, they have, they can feel the impact directly or indirectly. For some people, they get the money, a lot of money because of coal industry and timber and everything. But on the other hand, the other human, they just, oh, shit, I got flood again. That's what I feel when I back in Samarinda in 2013. Every time there's a rain, the next day when I went to the office, there's a flood. So I feel it. So in the other hand, for the animal, there's a unique animal in East Kalimantan called Pesut Mahakam. You never? It's a dolphin. Dolphin. It's kind of dolphin.
Dolphin river.
Yeah, dolphin river. It's freshwater dolphin. That's because of if you're say the Angga presentation at the beginning, you'll see there's a lot of coal in the middle of the river. And that's exactly where the dolphin lives. Can you imagine what happens when there's a lot of boat with a lot of coal? They're gone. So I think for Indonesian people, like Luke says, we are not have this kind of conversation in Indonesia. I think in the next future, it will be a good idea, because if there's more activism, more inclusion for everyone, we'll set the awareness. So when we have awareness, we can tell the people, and I think maybe in the next few years, we can do something about it. I think that's for me.
Thank you, Tono. Just a background, Tono also work for the government.
Yeah,
So- It actually surprised me that you have that kind of answer.
yeah, because
Did you experience firsthand yourself?
yeah, for myself and the corruption, I was there.
Okay.
So that's exactly where this Angga mentioned about corruption in local government, when they need a permission for open the mining industry, for central government in the local government, there's cost of politics. So that's real.
Okay. Mike,
Again,
as student who study environment, what do you think about student doing?
I'm very curious about, we know climate change is a very terrible thing. I do not see the like logical connection between destroying like capitalism and fighting climate change. Also, I accept the viewpoint of view, like we have to destroy capitalism and then we can save climate change. So can you tell me, like, after you guys systematic change, what's like in your visions the future government's gonna be? If you like want to change the current system.
Do you want, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good question. In terms of like the links between capitalism and the climate, I really think that the interest and the profit motive is a very key part in understanding why there's such reticence for governments to actually take action on climate change. I think that when you think about like, you know, two coal companies or two companies in general, one of them decides to like open up the Adani coal mine. If Adani decides, oh, you know what, I actually want to go green, be good for the planet, shuts down his coal mine, then another company is just going to come, open it up, make tons more profit than Adani could have. And especially because he would have lost out on all of the kind of, you know, profit from buying up the investment in the first place. He goes out of business. That's like on a small scale is how everything is operated. Our decisions are not made based on human need, based on environmental need, based on you know, fair use of the natural resources. It's based on what is profitable. So for me, I'm for socialism. I'm for organizing society based on human need. And I think like I'm quite radical, as I would say most people probably disagree. And I think, you know, you can be part of the climate movement and you should be part of the climate movement, even if you're not necessarily for socialism. But for me, I think that it would mean ordinary people in their workplaces actually being the ones to make decisions about the world. Not just like a kind of government of panels and, you know, people who are officially educated or like whatever in policy issues or, you know, in climate or whatever, but like people who are doing the kind of production in society being the ones to make the decisions. Because I think what you often find is people who do the work actually know much safer and better ways of going about doing it, but that's kind of ignored in the basis of preferencing profit and economy basically. And I'm for a system where we're not kind of preferencing economy and the profit motive.
You want to add something there?
Yeah, I think that was a very good response. And I would echo that. Yeah, I think like under capitalism, you have the idea of competition. Firms' goal is profit for shareholders, first and foremost. And so this consideration of environmental degradation, it's sort of abstract to them. But there's a few ways I think circumvent that. Ultimately, systematic change would be, as you said, sort of the workers having control, and democratic in that way. And I think it goes back to what we're saying about sort of our collective interests as students, but also with even fossil fuel workers, is we all have a collective interest in the environment that's sort of incongruous with this goal of businesses. But I think even if you don't want to destroy capitalism, it's sort of, I think, pretty intuitive to understand that the government should nationalize something like energy, because there are these negative consequences. And the whole history of even Australian companies like Rio Tinto is sort of in a lot of Asian countries or Oceanic countries is outside energy companies from Australia mining resources directly culpable for the type of damage done. Like, for example, Bougainville is a good example of Papua New Guinea, of Rio Tinto coming in and mining, destroying waterways for people who largely sustain themselves off the land. And I think that's sort of the natural state of being for a sort of capitalist society without proper regulations to stop it. So I don't think we have to necessarily agree on destroying capitalism to institute sort of reforms that will go a long way to destroying the environment. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know it, because I studied economics. And actually, like, waiting, I'm looking for Rui. Rui is also studying economics. I want to talk, I want to ask him a question, but he already left. But yeah, like this discussion or the debates related to capitalism and the alternative of capitalism is still emerging. It's like become a very hot debate. And if you guys like watch one of the current, I think it was like 2 months ago or 3 months ago, it was the debate related to green growth, degrowth from the Jason people, and then Kate Raworth. And that's very interesting point as well to discuss. And they need, I think it needs another like discussion just to discuss about that, and it probably takes like so much time. But I want to hear from Bangladesh perspective related to like activism, related to climate change. Especially you also, I know you also work for the government. I think I know everyone's working.
Thank you, Oscar. First of all, I'd like to extend my gratitude to all of you who just presented there and shared your understanding about climate change and impact. So I came from Bangladesh. It's a South Asian country. These are the Southeast Asia. The thing is, yeah, climate change has become a major concern for all of us because in recent times we have observed that the sea level is rising, and southern portion of my country is close to the coastal area. So with the rising level of with rising sea level, salinity intrusion is being occurred, and it means a majority of our fertile land is now become infertile, and we're really worried about that because the agricultural production has decreased to a greater extent. But the issue is, although we are overpopulated country, but these outcomes are not due to our deeds. It is the developed nations for which we are paying the price. And in many conferences, countries like USA, China, who are really contributing to these emissions to a greater extent, they also assure of giving fund to those countries to mitigate negative consequences of their carbon emission. But the thing is, in reality, these countries are actually not getting those funds and fighting terribly. And
what is in your mind related to climate activism? How's the state there?
The thing is, I'm sure I don't say that it's promising, The thing is, actually, we have such a lots of issues to deal with
Mhm.
that climate issue is neglected to some extent. Like, with Ukraine-Russia war, we have to deal with like price level increase in every commodity. And due to the impact of COVID, a majority of our population has to shift from city to their rural villages. So climate is neglected to a greater extent right now. Furthermore, developing countries like Bangladesh, they don't actually like to talk about climate because the understanding is we are trying to develop, and this is and to achieve economic growth, you need to actually forget the adverse outcomes that is occurring for the environment, that is happening with the environment. So it's like a trade-off. So as you're progressing, the dominant narrative is climate is something we should actually not to focus on. That we should not really focus on right now. It's something that comes later. Once you are developed, probably will be focusing on that. But this is not the right time to do so. The issue is one thing I like about regarding activism. Yeah. So the leftist political parties in Bangladesh and people who do left-aligned politics, I like them for one reason, because these are the people who raise critical voice about different government decisions that actually may compromise, that may actually adversely impact climate. So these alternative voices that are coming from leftist political parties. At the same time, they're the most critical persons about different government decisions that may actually impact climate related issues. So they're not the mainstream political parties in Bangladesh. They're marginalized people, I think. But the thing is, these are the people whom I found most interested in raising concerns about environment, and probably due to their activism, some of the government decisions are now delayed. For example, we were about to open a nuclear power plant to provide electricity. This was delayed due to their activism because they think that it can actually create an adverse outcome. Then there was coal-based power plant, which was about to build in Sundarbans. It's the largest mangrove forest. Probably, I'm not sure about that, but probably it's not the largest mangrove forest in Bangladesh and in India. But government was about to open a coal-based power plant, and these are the people who actually raised their concerns and their and ran activism on that, and this decision was almost postponed.
Yep.
So that's all from me. I mean, that's what.
Thank you, Zubair. So yeah, we almost 6.
Yeah.
And I'm respecting everyone time. But anyone want to say one or two sentence, I guess, or respond to the discussion today or questions? Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Rex, Brand, and Amanda for the discussion. So I think I just want to bring this information that I was already late. I mean, like all of us in this room probably agree that probably believe that climate change is a real crisis, and probably that we have to solve in the future. But the problem is like we can see, like as you say, like capitalism, they just don't believe in climate change. So I think some of our energy and resources that we use to do the activism, like protests, I don't say that it's not good, but yeah. Have you evaluated is that really works to, I mean, like to bring this issue matter to the people of the world? I mean, if not, so why don't we evaluate, like, why not we try to find the way how to make those categories become clear and they can accept the idea of climate change really. I mean, like, we are in the education, like we can do more of like research on that. So why don't we protest then ask the government to add more funding for the research on that, and then we can find like, I know, for me, I'm not really sure that climate change is caused by the fossil fuels only. Probably there are other things, and it's not fair if we just blame it on those one kind of resource. I mean, like source of problem. Probably that's the source of problem. I don't know. Probably there are other things too. So more research needed on that, and probably that's we can as the student, we can add more part on that, do some research and collaborate with the politician, then fight for the climate change. And I think that's my suggestion. So I mean, so that in the future it's not like stagnant, working in place, like no resolution, no. I mean, like no progress in doing this. This is useless, I think so. This is my suggestion.
Anyone want to respond?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of activism working out, and I don't see recommendations coming out like reduce some carbon emissions, reduce some usage of fuel and coal, but I don't see more investment on the alternative energy sources and so forth. And I'm asking this because as an activist over here, seeing students protest, I wonder like how much of their own personal life have they actually reduced the usage of fuel or in their homes as well. Because I take back to the Pacific Islands Forum that happened in 2019. I admire how the Pacific Islanders do the science protest that is currently how do I say? Anyway, but it's not as how it is in Australia, but it passes on a message from the students to the leaders, and the leaders also take this to the Pacific Island forums. And that, for me, that forum was very significant because the late Prime Minister of Tonga shed tears in that room, hearing about what the other nations are experiencing, and from the student voices, and turning around and asking the then Prime Minister Scott Morrison if he knew about it, and only for Scott Morrison to slap back with Australia's economy. So as a student activist, I feel like it is more, how do I say, but coming from Pacific Islanders, the student activists there, it is more value in that, given their lives are not shaped by development, and also the leaders have moved for sustainable and environmentally friendly development, then student activists here who probably, I don't understand, but they might have to try and tackle ways to minimize the usage. But I do respect and admire the effort put in by developed countries in debating and trying to bring this global crisis to on the table, like for discussion, to do something about it. But I hope, like as like our I hope what I was thinking is like, this do sound very good, and I hope that if they make it to Parliament one day, that they'll be able to influence change in the government for the whole Pacific region. Yes,
that's very good reflections. I mean, like as you see, Teresa, like I guess like they also have this discussion like weekly every Friday, right? So it's also a good like good time for everyone to come in and like hop in and share their ideas. And just as a background, probably like because like in postgraduate hall, like most of us have this professional. I mean, we've been working like for some extent years before, and then we probably like face with this kind of like reality, especially when we already like get into the politics, because we are in the government. and we're part of the policy decision, and sometimes it's pretty hard. So we really admire. I also admire like all the works, like the activism. Even I know like some like workers who are staff who already works in the government, they try to have this, I don't know, like they still have this try to keep their voices even though they are be part of the government. And I don't know, I don't want to stop the conversation, so you guys can continue after this, but formally I just want to close it. But just remember, after, so everyone has like work or study in your place. And I guess like as an economic student, we always talk about efficiency, but now like the emerging is not efficiency, but with equity and other things. I guess like it's good. It's also a good thing to everywhere we work or everywhere we study, we kind of remember like, is it like only that goal that we want to pursue? Is there any other thing that we need to consider, and how we gonna fit in all of this like problem and complexity into this one giant ball? That's, I guess, like I'm gonna close. You want to say something, Angga?
Oh yeah.
And we done that.
Yeah.
All right, and then right now we done.
I think the solutions are already there in terms of tackling. You need to like completely switch from dirty economies, dirty energies to renewable energies. I think the science is already there. But why it doesn't happen? Because the government and the industries, they've been, they've benefited from the industries that are dirty so far, like coal, palm oil, and so forth. That's, I think, the importance of activism. As you said before, activism can share the awareness, can push everyone to make change. Even in several cases, there's like some success of activism, just like Ren mentioned earlier. In East Kalimantan, for example, when there's a rise of environmental movements, the mining concession had declined from 2016 to 17, from hundreds to like dozens only, because there's a rise of activism. So that's one of the important success. But I want to reflect as well, in Indonesia, it is very rare to talk about climate issues or even activism in general. Yeah, we need to acknowledge this as well. Compared to Australia, for example, when Ren presenting their picture, there's like even high school students, turning into the streets to the protest and so on. But in Indonesia, high school students, they are pushed to be loyal to the parents. Don't be like. I think you need to be obedient, okay, to the parents. Even when I was a kid, when I wanted to go to the college, my parents taught me that don't dare to join a protest. It's like a riot, my parents say. Because we need to realize that we've lived in Indonesia 32 years, under dictatorships. My parents' generation had lived 30 years under dictatorship. That's why I think it's that makes sense for me. That's why they kind of have like a very conservative ideas. Because the world, the environment is relatively open. I think it's a chance for us to move forwards to what our parents have. Because I think this is not only a task for our generation, this is also a task for our future generations, our kids, children, if you want to have one or something. That's why I think it's important to share the awareness from this discussion. Or
I think like the main point is like because there's a lot of silent voices and nature cannot represent themselves. So I guess for myself, this activism is like representing these silent voices. So either someone like to write an opinion op-ed in the newspaper, you guys can do it. Either you can represent that in your union, in the work office, you can do that as well. Or as simple as when you make this regulation, like sometimes in the office we make this like rules and structure, we can voice them as well. So that's part of activism. To close, you guys want to add something or comment or respond? And then we're done.
Sure. I would just like to thank you for organizing this interesting discussion. I think we might have like our approach policy, but if we all acknowledge how serious this issue is and take considerable steps, I think activism is important in that, as you said, it's a means of political education as it is a means of directly attacking sort of the government. And I feel even if you get disheartened whether a protest is necessarily successful, I think you just have to think about the country without protests entirely. So if you're protesting the climate and the government doesn't change it the next day, it's very different. The fact that there is visible resistance, I think, is something in itself, and it's something to keep in mind and not get disheartened. But thank you.
Thank you. Right?
Yeah,
Welcome, Alex.
just briefly, but yeah, thank you for everyone for participating in the discussion. It was really interesting to hear everyone's thoughts, and thanks to Rex and Alga as well for your presentations, and thanks for organizing all of this. Yeah, I think increasing the kind of discussions and stuff that we have about climate activism, climate change in general is, you know, one of the most pressing issues and existential issues that we face as a society, not just in any one particular country, but everyone has talked about the different political issues that face their own countries. And I think, yeah, drawing things back to like, yeah, what we can kind of do in the here and now. I think that, yeah, for me, climate activism and engaging in that in whatever different way you can do that, like through your union, through the kind of stuff that you argue for in your workplace, or by coming along to a protest, like that is, I think, an important way of like, yeah, trying to push and affect change in the here and now. I think, yeah, there's a long kind of road ahead of us, but yeah, there's so much we have to fight for. There's so many people across the world who are going to be negatively affected by the climate crisis, and I think that the kind of it's a class issue, really. Like the ruling classes of every kind of country, they will not be affected in the same way as the vast majority of ordinary people across the world. And I think for the vast majority of people, we have to do kind of what we can to push for more in the here and now. And yeah, I thank everyone for engaging in this discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Also, thank you everyone for coming and joining us this discussion. Hopefully it's not like the last one. And if you guys have any discussion from your country association, like let us know. Just post it in that whole group, like what I did. I'll probably jump in as well. So enjoy the food and thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for organizing.
Thank you very much.
I can use a good.
When you make it, just like
Oh yeah, I was like.
oh yeah, come on. Take a big boy and thank you.
Yeah. Ask.
Kayak rambut gitu.
Suaranya mampu loh mas.